That's the cool part though. We get to chat with unanimously the world's best pickleball player in Ben Johns today on the Athletes Podcast for what I believe is the 134th episode of the Athletes Podcast. Absolutely crazy. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show, sharing, educating, entertaining, and inspiring the next generation of athletes with us today.
Happy to be here. 134. That's quite a number. Let's go. I've made it.
Right? I know. Hey, well, that's what happens when you're number one in literally every category when it comes to pickleball, whether it's singles, doubles, or mixed doubles. You have the sport basically on lock. And before we started recording here, you just talked about how it's nice to have people always chasing you. And I'd love for you to maybe peel that back immediately and just share your experience right now at the top, having been at the top for a while now, obviously 11 triple crowns, over 50 championships won. How does it feel right now, man, to be sitting on top of the world at 23?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's definitely, it feels good for sure. Obviously, being at the top of anything, not many people get a chance to have that experience. So I'm pretty grateful for that. At the same time, I don't take it too seriously because pickleball is a very new sport. It changes and has been changing very rapidly. There's a lot of new players that are really good coming in all the time. So it's like kind of a big fish in a small pond type of thing, which is a good and interesting thing. But yeah, I think it's important not to take it too seriously because of that. And also, it just makes it more fun if you don't take it too seriously. But as far as being number one goes, I guess a lot of people think of it as a form of pressure, or it's hard to be motivated because what more do you have to achieve? But I'd say a lot of the fun is in being chased, so to speak. People are always trying to beat you. You are the guy to beat, basically. And it's not so much about the titles you win or any of that. It's more about kind of personally improving, meeting personal goals, and the longer you can stay at the top, the more satisfying it is, basically. So there's always more goals to find, that no matter what your ranking is, no matter what your number is. And pressure wise, I really like one of the great quotes is pressure is a privilege. So I mean, if you're pressured in a situation, it's because you're in a privileged position. So I value that a lot.
It's so incredible to hear that mindset that you bring to the table because a lot of youth in our generation, and I say that because we're around the same age, would get to that point and then get comfortable, get complacent, not necessarily train as hard as they need to be. Obviously, you're going above and beyond that. I was reading you're doing 6, 7 days of training, 2 to 3 hours per session. Can you maybe just take us through what a day in the life of Ben Johns looks like right now before we go back to your maybe previous experiences?
Yep. So a typical day, right now I live in Austin, Texas. It's the summer, so it's usually between 90 and 100 degrees. So we practice in the morning to kind of avoid the worst heat where it'll go over 100. So usually practicing in about low 90s. A practice session is usually at least 3 hours, sometimes it's three and a half. So say that's 9 to 12:30. Then I'm not a big fan of breakfast, so I don't eat beforehand. I just drink, do the practice, get a quick protein shake or something similar. Then I'll go directly to my workout usually, which is either with my trainer or my own workout that I devise. It's a little bit of both, like half and half.
Mm-hmm.
That workout's usually about an hour at least. That usually takes me to about 2 o'clock or so, and then got to do kind of stretching and all that, more of the recovery stuff. And some days I'll do massage therapy as well, or just my own, like a massage therapist or personal massage kind of stretching time. And that can, be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And by that time, you've been at it for about 7 hours total, and five of those are putting in some type of work. And then outside of that, you're just kind of eating healthy and hydrating and thinking about more ways to get better faster, and sometimes content based. So the social media world, that's important these days, of course. So right now, actually, I'm trying to figure out how best to approach that in terms of Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. There's so many, and I'm not savvy like that, and I don't really enjoy it that much, other than the creative idea part. So that's kind of my work day, so to speak. And then my on the road days are a little different. Starting in August and throughout the rest of the year, I'll have either 2 or 3 tournaments every month. So it'll usually go from one to the next, and then I might have a week at home in between.
It's crazy the differences that being on the road versus at home in your own consistent routine can allow or impact how you perform. Hopefully, you didn't have any performance changes back in Austin a couple weeks ago. But I wanted to touch on that first part you brought up in your intro, is the fact that you've reached this summit, 23 years old, over 50 wins, 11 triple crowns. You're literally the Wayne Gretzky or the Tiger Woods of your sport in pickleball, because it is growing so fast. And like, the fact that you've been able to do this at such a young age is mind boggling, because you legitimately have 20 years to continue doing this at your pace. And this is in a sport that allows you to do that. This, like golf, like curling, lower impact on the body, maybe not quite as strenuous. Can you maybe speak to the longevity that you see in this sport? I know you started off playing table tennis and tennis, and those are maybe some sports that allowed you to get into pickleball, and we can touch on that maybe a little later. But like, you've got to see 10, 20, 30 years down the road that you can be doing this forever.
Yeah, I'd say I actually take more of a cautious view to that than anything, because I don't want to be like, hey, I could just be here and roll through for the next 10 years, right? 10, 20, whatever. Because I think the game's definitely getting younger. It's getting more athletic, and it really requires that. So there's a few outliers that are still older relatively that are doing well. But I think it's harder and harder to do. And I think in just the next few years, maybe 2 or 3, it's going to be really hard to be over, say, 35 and still be doing well, honestly. So
Mm.
I don't view it as something I can rely on or fall back on to be playing this for a long time. And not only that, but I think you're not just defending like a normal sport, like say, tennis, where you're number one. Yeah, you're defending a lot of good players. Here, you're not just doing that. You're defending from a huge influx of new players. That's what kind of
Mm.
everyone's doing. I've only been playing this sport for 6 years. So for me to be in the position I'm in, it's, I'd say, not highly defensible, because there's so many new things that nobody's seen, not just myself, but nobody's seen in the sport. So you almost have to feel like you could be unseated at any time, just because I legitimately think that's true. So you got to work all the harder, and that really doesn't give you any promise of any amount of time, despite the amazing longevity of the sport, and being able to play at least for fun. But in my opinion, at a high level, it's going to get younger and younger, and it's going to get a lot more difficult. So I see it as difficult days ahead, which I enjoy, but yes, difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jordan just pulled up a stat from 2020 to 2021. There was a 14.8% growth on the heels of 21.3% growth the previous year. So putting it at an 11 and a half average annual growth rate over the past 5 years, which is why you have guys like Gary Vaynerchuk investing in pro pickleball league teams and starting their own franchises. Can you speak to like what pro pickleball looks like now, with 48 players competing on 12 teams? Like, this has got to be pretty crazy for you to witness the change over the past 6 years, from starting the sport to now having it where it's becoming a more mainstream sport that's consumed around the world.
Yeah. So what I think of it is interesting about it is I think a lot of people see it as an investment opportunity and something good to get into, because it's a game that truly anybody can enjoy. I've seen, despite whatever your age is, 5, 80 years old, guy, girl, whatever your background is, no sports background, tons of sports backgrounds, former pro athlete in football, basketball, whatever, or your Gary V's. I mean, they all can enjoy it. They can have fun on the same kind of level, so to speak. You might have some variance, but everyone can have fun with it, and everyone can relate on it, and everyone seems to enjoy it. So it's not something like football in that Gary V's not going to go out and play football, is he? But he might go out and play pickleball. I've seen him play pickleball before. So that is a really cool aspect, I think. And the other thing is, because it's such a game that relates people together, or brings people together, it makes it a very interesting investment opportunity, or something for people to get into, because you see such a wide variety of people, and such interesting people. So yeah, investing in leagues, investing in pro pickleball, I think is super smart, because one, huge growth rate, and two, I think with that, the pro is naturally going to grow a lot, because you're going to get more viewers, and by more viewers, you get more sponsors, TV, whatever, everything. And you're going to get more viewers, because it's very much a participation sport. It's not just a viewer sport, and there's differences between that. It's probably it's never going to overtake the NBA or the NFL, and those are more viewer sports than player sports. But there's a lot to be said about sports that have a lot of players that are also viewers and people that are enthusiastic about it. So it's definitely got a lot going for it in terms of growth.
I could not agree more. I've played it a couple of times and I love it. I'm hooked. I don't get to play it as often, but it's like one of those ones that I'm like, next time if I'm ever in the area, I'm calling up Ben Johns and I want to get my ass kicked. But a question, how was Gary at pickleball? Was he all right?
So I think when I watched him play, this was back in 2017, I think. So it was the first time he played, I'm pretty sure. And I didn't even know who he was at the time. I only realized in hindsight who he was. But he was decent, especially for a first timer. And I'm not sure how much he's played since then, but clearly he's still into it, seeing as he bought into the sport and invested in it. And it's actually kind of in line with Gary Vee's thinking. I think he's very much a futuristic kind of person. What's developing in pickleball more than anything seems like a sport of the future. It's something that just about anyone can play, and that seems to me like a futuristic sport.
100%. There's actually a quote here. I was doing some research prior. He says he likes the sport for the same reason he invested in esports. He likes being a smart businessman, and he thinks that it's a sport that every part of his spidey senses tell him that it's going to play out. So he'd like to be a big impact on the sport, and obviously you're going to be a beneficiary of that given your prowess.
I agree with Gary Vee's spidey senses. Maybe not my own, but if I'm in line with Gary Vee, we're going in a good path.
Okay, so what makes your spidey senses go off then? Like what happened 6 years ago to cause you to go from playing tennis, watching your brother compete on the ATP tour, to giving up table tennis to go and pursue the sport of pickleball?
Yeah, honestly, pickleball kind of crept up on me. I can't say I saw it and immediately was like, oh, this is it. This is the sport. This is what I'm going to play professionally. Like, I didn't even think of it as a sport, really. I thought it was more like a fun game, and certainly not a professional sport. For the first couple of years I was playing, it was more just for fun. And really, I think the year where I saw more of a inflection point was when bigger sponsors started getting into it, when sponsors and sports companies outside of the intrinsic pickleball companies were like, oh, this is for real. And that's when it kind of turned into more of a real professional sport and possibly career for me, more like in 2019. So yeah, but to be honest, I thought it was fun and I kept playing it and it kind of fell into my lap because I enjoyed it. I got better at it quickly. So in that sense, I wasn't like, this is an opportunity for me. It was more just like, I love playing this, so I'm going to keep playing it. So I can't tell you I had any spidey senses like Gary Vee, but I'm certainly glad that I got into it just because I enjoyed it so much. And I think that's where everybody's at. They play it first because they enjoy it, not necessarily as like, this is the future for me.
Yeah, it's so true. Disc golf is also a very similar position where it's growing. Barriers to entry are limited. So two to keep an eye on. I'm curious though, like you go from such a high level of tennis, of table tennis, you've got to be looking at that like almost a sunk cost, and it's allowed you to perform at such a high level playing pickleball. But difficulties during that transition, frustrating moments where you're like, man, why am I doing this? Like, do I bother continuing on like trying to pave this new path, or like do I go back to tennis? Any like regrets there?
Not at all. Really, to be honest, with tennis, I had no aspirations to play professionally or even collegiately, just because I was my brother's hitting partner for many years, and he was on the ATP tour, and that's why I was good at tennis. But I didn't like it enough or love it enough like he did to want to do it really professionally or close to that. I was done with tennis rather earlier, other than anything with him. Table tennis, kind of same deal. Really enjoyed it, but not something I wanted to do full time. I never really considered myself as somebody that wanted to do something like a professional sport full time because I enjoy variety too much until I found pickleball. And then it was kind of a thing where I didn't know it could be a professional sport. So I only played it for enjoyment. And that's what led me to playing it professionally. It's something I had to enjoy first and not see as something I had to get good at. Right. It was more of a natural course, I'd call it.
That's the best way for any athlete to start playing any sport and to become the best that they can be, is when money isn't the incentive or the driver. Okay, I have to ask, I feel like you're ambidextrous. I've seen you hitting the ball with both forehands. I feel like you've had this skill instilled from a young age. Like, take me back to early days where Ben Johns was just sitting on the tennis court, grueling, playing both hands. Like, what was Was it the parents? Was it your brother just having to be the hitting partner? What was going on?
Yeah, so technically not ambidextrous, but cross dominant.
Okay.
Ambidextrous is like truly not one or the other. Cross dominant, I just have some tendencies that are lefty. So, for instance, in baseball, I threw righty, but I batted lefty. I golf lefty. Um, I do almost anything one-handed righty. But because of that kind of cross dominance, in tennis, I chose to play with two forehands. And that was kind of a older brother and dad inspired idea because my brother started tennis at 14 or 15. And when you start that late at tennis, like you don't have a chance of being good. Most people
Mhm.
know that, like it's too late. So my dad was like, hey, let's give you something unique. Why don't we just play with two forehands? Like nobody does that and you're starting late. So why not give it a go? We'll see how it goes. And my brother kind of gravitated to that and did really well with it immediately, even though he's entirely righty. All his leftiness was just learned. And he ended up going on the ATP tour from the age of 14 starting, which is super impressive from anybody that knows tennis. And he did it with two forehands. So I just kind of followed along with what he did, and I did it in tennis. And then when I did pickleball, I did two forehands briefly for a time in singles. And then kind of based on the strategy that I was playing in singles, I stopped doing that. I adapted and changed a lot of things. But yeah, I'm still partially cross dominant and can use the left hand when I want to.
Okay, okay. I know also part of your strategy is getting to the front of the net or getting in front of the net. I remember well, it was super difficult, but that was one of the things that was a reoccurring theme for you is, hey, like most points are won there. Obviously, you've got a option between driving and dinking the ball, which are two pretty hilarious, terminologies to use. Um,
Pickleball has a ton of interesting terminology.
yeah, which is what I kind of wanted to get at
It's
because you played.
pickleball, there's a kitchen, there's dinking, there's driving, there's Ernie's, there's Bert's. Like whoever made up this terminology is on something.
Yeah, like, and I need some of it, but either way, like, we got to figure out. Can you like give a Cole's Notes 30-second tutorial to those listening, like maybe what those are and how they are incorporated into the game, so that they can like attribute, like, hey, I listened to a podcast with Ben, he explained it perfectly.
Okay, yeah. If you don't know pickleball, basically a drive is your hard shot. You're hitting this low to the net and hard. It's equivalent to a ground stroke in tennis. A dink or a drop, they're synonymous almost. A dink is when anything you keep in the kitchen, such that when it bounces, it stays low. And when it's in the kitchen, you can't hit it out of the air. So basically, you can't smash it. It's hard to attack. A drop is the same thing, but you hit it from further back. A dink is when you're already up at the kitchen line. Dinks are more often used in doubles. Drops are more often used. I mean, they're used in singles and doubles, but you rarely see people just dinking in singles because there's too much court. An Ernie is when you jump from the kitchen line to outside of the court, such that it's hard to picture. But basically, if you are to the side of the kitchen, so if this is the kitchen line, the outside kitchen line, you stand here, you can go all the way up to the net and just smash it straight down. But you have to be outside the court to do that. And you kind of got to jump as your opponent's hitting the ball in order to hit that. A Bert is the same thing, except you're jumping in front of your partner.
Gotcha. It's awesome. I'm laughing so much. The other part that you have to deal with is the fact that people know you're good, and when you're playing a doubles match, the ball doesn't tend to go to you that often. Like, how are you communicating with your partner? You're like, hey man, like, let me get some action here, because your opposing team is deliberately just forcing the ball to your partner.
Yeah, targeting occurs with me, but also with tons of people. And how I view it is, if your partner is being targeted, unless they're just terrible, then it's actually a good thing for your team, because it's much more difficult as the opposing team to play to one side of the court and not use the whole court than it is to hit to both sides, basically. So they have to hit in a smaller area. You can put a lot of pressure on them. You can be moving around very liberally. You can take balls because you know where it's going generally. So there's a lot of it takes away the anticipation part of it. Like there's not a lot of disguise. Like you're not hiding enough as the opposing team. So there's definitely some strategies you got to employ to kind of get out of that if your partner's struggling. But there's a ton of advantages in it. Like if they're being forced to target, you're probably in a good position because they're probably basically scared of one person on the other side.
Yeah, makes sense, which has probably allowed for you to, with the strategies you've applied, I'm assuming that's what allowed you to get to like a 170 game winning streak at one point. Like, can you maybe speak to how you like the consistency aspect? Because, that's unheard of statistics, frankly.
Yeah, 170 is actually a myth. I don't know who propagated that, but it wasn't 170. It was 108, and it was singles only. So it was 108 singles matches.
Gotcha.
So yeah, doubles. I'm not sure what the streak would have been.
You got to chirp Pickleball University. Pickleball University, they got a phony article. Yeah, we got to light them up.
Well, yeah, we just did. All right. Yeah. So doubles. I mean, there's just a lot more variables, I guess, in doubles. Like you can't control if your partner's not playing well. You can't. There's less control over the match that you have, I guess. Singles is a little different in that you have entire control because you're only playing with yourself. But also it's a more streaky game. It's people hit passing shots more. They hit it harder. There's more chance basically in it. And I think what I did in singles, and first I'd like to clarify that for the streak time that I had, it was not a large pool of players. Obviously, there were still a lot of good players and all that, but it's increasingly getting better and better. So it's easier to do when you're playing the same people over and over because you know their tendencies really well. I think why streaks don't happen very much is because you see somebody new, like in tennis, which is just a good kind of comparison. People, when their streaks are ended, they often lose to the players they haven't seen a lot, right? So I was seeing a lot of the same players. I knew how to beat them. So I would just do it over and over. That's more repeatable than new people. It's not that they're super good, it's they're unknown. So you don't know tendencies. And pattern recognition is just huge in pickleball. It's mostly what it is. So I kind of found a way in singles to where my strategy minimized unforced errors. It minimized kind of the plays they had. It almost forced my opponent to play a certain way, and I was just generally better at it, and I read tendencies better. So that's kind of what allowed for that streak to happen. It was a lot about pattern recognition, playing the same people, and employing the correct strategy.
Yeah, I was watching some of your highlights film from the past couple of years, and I was trying to figure out like what makes you so unique. And I've heard your playing style described as like Frankensteinian almost, the way you put it together. But you know, a combination of your size. I think you're slightly bigger than most of your opponents. You look like you're faster, stronger. Anything else that you can attribute other than like your pattern recognition? To your point, like, are you willing to make those decisions? And I think you play in a very composed fashion that almost lets your opponents make the mistake first, and you can capitalize when they do make that. Am I wrong?
Yeah, there's some sense of that for sure. I think you're partially correct there. I'd say it's methodical for sure. There's definitely a kind of game plan that it's kind of like I don't need to do something a new game plan. You're kind of the challenger. You have to adapt your game style to beat me. If we both play ours, I'm going to beat you. And if you force them to change to you, usually they're going to just play worse. And I feel like often, even if they did have the game to beat me, they felt like they had to change. And people aren't good at that. So that's a big kind of pressure applied thing that helps a lot. Other than that, yeah, the Frankenstein portion is definitely true. More so for doubles than singles, and that's because in pickleball, people are just figuring out all kinds of new things all the time. It's not like a very solved sport. We kind of know the correct way to play basketball for the most part. Maybe there's an occasional new thing every couple of years, more 3-pointers recently or whatever. But pickleball is evolving so rapidly. Like people learn new stuff all the time because it's such a new sport. If I've only been playing for 6 years, like that tells you kind of what kind of discovery there is in the sport. And the easiest way for me to add new skills is not to really figure them out myself. There's some of those, but to look at what other players do well. Say you have this new player that does this one skill really well, and you're like, gosh, I haven't seen that before. It'd be nice if I had that. You can. You just got to think about it, right? If you're in your infancy, basically, of the sport in your first 6 years, I'd compare that to being, starting a sport at 5 and learning something new at 11. That's no problem, right? So you have to do the same thing in the sport because there's new things added all the time. And if you don't add new things, you're going to be left behind. So I'd attribute a lot of the success to adding new things, experimenting, and learning from other players continuously. Those are all super important.
Is all that learning from your time spent at the Maryland Table Tennis Center when you were growing up with your brother?
I don't know where you're bringing these facts out of. Maryland Table Tennis Center. Yeah, I spent a lot of time there. That's where most of my table tennis got a lot better, more my competition, and then the other portion was in my basement with my brother. Played a lot with him. So I learned very early on, because I was the younger brother by far, 6 years, how to get good from the people I play with or the people I watch. I learned a
Mm.
lot from watching Colin play tennis, play table tennis, playing with him. And the same can be applied to other people. Basically, you have to learn from people that are better than you.
Any athletes that you grew up watching, idolizing, trying to emulate?
Honestly, I always was a fan of variety more than anything. I
Mm.
don't really have a sports idol. It was more that I enjoyed watching different players all the time. I wanted to compare and contrast and see what this person did well, because nobody is the best at everything. They all had their thing that they're good at, or their couple things, but not everything. So it was more about the variety and comparing and contrasting than this is my guy, right?
Mm. Interesting, because I know your hobbies include traveling, spike ball, golf, table tennis, chess, weightlifting, reading. Anything in particular that's like your fave, your go-to Sunday, maybe on your off day when you're not playing pickleball?
Uh, Favorite. It very much depends on the kind of setting I'm in. It can vary super widely. But if you give me a free Sunday, I'll probably combine a couple of them. I might cook and play some Magic the Gathering, or I might go out to a new foodie spot. Austin's a great spot for new foods. I admittedly love food and love trying new things. So probably one of those on a Sunday. But weightlifting definitely is kind of a constant, and it has been both for pickleball and for me personally since I was a mid-teen. And yeah, it just depends on the day, but all of those are definitely still things I enjoy.
Okay, so follow up to that is favorite exercise while you're in the gym, and then favorite food that you would go out like on that every Sunday and be like you could rely on that meal.
Sure. Yeah. So my favorite exercise is one of two things. It goes back and forth, but I like back squats, Olympic bar, pretty classic.
Nice.
And I like hex bar deadlifts, which are kind of a deadlift and a squat combined, if you've seen a hex bar. And I
Yeah.
love both these just because it's both full body, squats a little more legs than full body, deadlifts pretty full body. But both of them fuel everything else. Everything else feels better. It gets me energized. It gets me exhausted at the same time. And I feel like all my other weightlifts and exercises I do benefit so much more from being fueled by the bigger ones. So either one of those is like, if I could only choose one exercise, it would be one of those two probably. On a Sunday, I'm a big fan of a lot of different types of Asian foods. So my go-to food here is a hot pot. Not everyone has been to hot pot before, but it's kind of a, if you've been to Korean barbecue, it's similar. It's where you put raw meats and vegetables and a bunch of different kind of things in this hot boiling super broth, and it's a family style. And you make your own sauce often at like a sauce bar, and there's a ton of variety. You get your noodles, your meat, your veggies, and there's all kinds of exotic things as well. Like you can eat baby octopus, you can eat pig brain. Like there's some interesting
Nice.
stuff there, as well as the classic good stuff. So that's my go-to.
Okay, so you're sitting enjoying your hot pot, and next thing happens, Bill Gates tweets at you asking for advice for pickleball. What the heck do you do? Do you spit out your hot pot?
No, I finished my hot pot first. That's more important. Yeah, I'm surprised you got that today. Good timing. Maybe I'd invite him to have some hot pot if he hasn't before, and we can talk about his pickleball game before we play. But yeah, I think I could give Bill Gates a tip or two that he might appreciate.
Dude, that's crazy. Like you just had one of the world's most wealthy individuals in the world like at you on Twitter asking for advice as he's doing a pickleball commercial. Like just wrap your head around the fact that you're now the Michael Jordan of your sport. Just like absorb that and then think about like, hey, how do I continue to like progress? Like to me, I'm like, man, it's like tough to beat that. Like who do I got to wait for? Warren Buffett, like Elon Musk. Like you got to start chopping off those guys off the list.
Now, Bill Gates is amazing. Very much admiration for him. I've said it in many interviews. Elon's my all-time idol. So Bill just missed out on my tier. If Elon had added me, I would have freaked out.
Hey, you got time, man. You got time. You got time. You're 23, all right?
Maybe we can get Bill and Elon and myself on a court and a mystery fourth.
Yes. Hey, I'll join. I'll jump in. No problem. I'll take whoever's needed.
Me, Bill, Elon, and David. Let's go.
There we go. We got a group. That's a wicked wicked group. I don't know who Foursome, who are we putting our money on? Like, are you, like, if you were to choose, are you taking me on your team, or are you putting Bill and Elon against us? What's going on? Who
I
do you
want
want?
Elon. I have to have Elon, no matter what. Or
Okay,
maybe I
that's
want to hit
fair.
him with the ball. I don't know.
Yeah, he'd probably send it into the orbit and then have it come down in your kitchen. So, so you don't want that happening. He's messing with your kitchen. But you also, I want to also talk about your mixed doubles partner, Annalay Waters, named best female athlete in the game. Are you guys just like this power duo that feeds off each other and is now going to be unstoppable in the sport for the next decade?
Yeah, well, once again, there's unpredictability in the sport. There's always new people coming in and getting better. I do think she's the best, and that's why I want to play with her, and I assume vice versa for her. So yeah, she's incredible to play with. She's not only mentally strong for her age, she's just mentally strong, period. So it's really amazing to play with somebody like that. Um, just I haven't really seen that before, honestly. And to be as good as she is crazy, also at her age. Um, so yeah, I foresee a lot of playing with her, and hopefully a lot of winning, and we'll be dominant as long as we can.
Yeah, I love that. It's so cool I love the fact that the sports, racket sports in particular, allow for those mixed events, bringing in just new audiences, incorporating collaboration. It's
Oh
all
yeah,
good stuff.
it's really interesting actually. I think mixed doubles might be the most watched out of all three, which is super unusual. Like
Mm.
tennis, I think the order might be something like men's singles, women's singles, men's doubles, women's doubles, mixed doubles. That's
Mhm.
the approximate order. I might be wrong, don't quote me, but I think that's it. And I feel like that's pretty true for most sports. But here, the girls can compete very easily. Like they're super good, and they're super good at a lot of things. And oftentimes, like women's doubles points, in my opinion, are more entertaining than guys' doubles points.
Mhm.
So you have this interesting contrast where people like to watch girls when they can compete with the guys and they can even beat the guys, and that's what happens in mixed doubles all the time. You have them going at it and they win often. And there's just interesting points in kind of all three. So to have a sport where that occurs is really cool. Like I don't think you don't see that in tennis very much, just because
No.
mostly because of the serve. Honestly, like when you have John Isner bombing a serve at 140, I mean, even if you're Serena, it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
what do I do with that, right?
Yeah.
So not as interesting. And pickleball kind of takes that out, and there's a lot of strengths about the game that benefit the girls' side, like super good at defense. That's obviously huge. So it just makes it super entertaining. Women's doubles, mixed doubles, men's doubles, whatever you want to watch. It's all going to be interesting.
It's one of the great equalizers. I think this sport allows for everyone to compete, no matter the age. Like I remember seeing some interview. I can't remember what it was. I've watched so many of your videos over the past 48 hours. I know Aaron Resnick gave an incredible intro that was stupendous, according to you. But it's just such an interesting fact, because I know one article was saying this 40-year-old guy came off of eating a bag of chips and beat two of the top players, like, a couple of weeks prior. And it was like, man, you don't hear that in any other sport, but apparently in pickleball it can happen.
I do know what they're talking about there. He was, I know all the four players that were.
No way. Do you want to share it? You want to highlight a story here?
It's not that much of a highlight. It's just an example of it can happen all the time in pickleball. You can have upsets just because how it's played, and there's a lot of equalizers. And that's not to say being a good athlete doesn't help you a lot. It's just that it'll help you a little bit less. Like I've seen NBA players play, and they're often terrible. Like it just
I feel like being lower to the ground would help.
it does and it doesn't. Being long is super helpful because it basically takes the kitchen, makes it smaller. Whenever you give your opponent a smaller target, it's tougher for them. But at the same time, yeah, when you get that ball to bounce, it's tough. So I played with Casey Patterson. He's a top volleyball player, and he's like 6'7", but he's got like a 7'2" wingspan. It's just silly.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because when you're trying to drop, it's like it almost never bounces. He's just always reaching in and taking it out of the air. But when it does bounce, he just looks like a baby deer. He's like, oh, that's just so far to bend. Pretty entertaining. But yeah, like you were saying, it's an equalizer in a lot of ways. You can be smaller and be good. You can be bigger and be good. You don't need one body type, at least yet. Whereas if you're looking at volleyball or basketball, we all know the body type, right? If you're looking at football, we know the body type. So it's interesting that it's an equalizer in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we're still in the real early stages of identifying what the ideal pickleball player looks like, and Everyone has their opportunity to create their own little niche here. It's pretty wild timing, to say the least. I wanted to just touch, yeah, man. I wanted to touch on your nutrition in the Wild West, other than hot pots. I know that, like, consuming proper daily intake is important for you as an athlete. Not eating breakfast, you mentioned getting a protein shake in, but any specific diets, regimens that you've adapted now that you're trying to maintain a certain weight, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I've been doing like a lot of experimenting, definitely even recently. So I don't really have it down to a science yet, and I'm not always the most disciplined because I enjoy food. It's one of the finer points of life, and obviously I'm
Hmm.
not eating terrible stuff, but I'm not disciplined like Tom Brady over there, right?
You're not taking out tomatoes out of your diet?
Vegan or vegetarian or whatever he is. But I definitely have some things that I kind of stick to, especially the closer I get to a tournament. So when I'm close to a tournament, fried foods and sugar go out the window, and those are definitely minimized at any time. But during or before a tournament are just no goes, like not at all, because it literally speeds up your heartbeat, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
Um, Outside of that, mainly just protein focused, especially during training. It's just about building muscle, building endurance, the kind of muscle you want, even your fast twitch, which doesn't necessarily help, but maybe I feel like it does. So my go-tos are like sushi, chicken, steak. Try not to add too much extra stuff outside of that. You got your healthy carbs like your rice and stuff, but not so much of the bread or the empty carbs. And try not to do sugar, especially not drinking sugar. That's very bad in my opinion.
Hmm.
So more just like a couple principles to stick to more than like a discipline. This is what you eat all the time. I've
Yeah.
also experimented recently with the carnivore diet, which is just all meat. And I don't think that's a lifestyle thing because you're just missing too many key things nutritionally to make that sustainable. But I think it's almost like people do like juice cleanses and stuff. It can be like a cleanse for like a week where you I personally feel amazing after that week. It's incredible, but don't want to do that for too long because you're missing out on some stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And a short little elimination diet never hurt anyone. It gets everything reset, identify what's working and what's not working for your body. I wanted to bring up a couple other points before I let you go here. I know Ben John's a busy guy, but one of the things was your new partnership with Joola and your new paddle that you just signed, signature paddle. That's sick. Like, man, Arnold Palmer had to battle back in his time to get his own clubs made, and you've got this freaking incredible partnership set up. Can
I've
you
got a
maybe speak to?
German engineering company working for me now. Let's go. We made it. Yeah, I have it a lot easier than Arnold, but they're really good at what they do. 70 years in table tennis. Like, if you don't know table tennis, it's much more advanced than pickleball in terms of paddle construction, or they call it a bat or a blade plus rubbers. It's super advanced. Even the glue that they use for the rubbers matters, which is way beyond what we know as ping pong. But yeah, they're super advanced, and they have a lot of capabilities coming into the sport. They wanted to launch with a splash. They said, we can basically do whatever you want. Here are our capabilities. Can you work with us? I was like, this sounds pretty good. I believe you can do things that pickleball world hasn't seen yet. And designing with them from the start was easy, seamless, and it turned out well. And it's only improving. They're constantly working on new things. I just got like 20 prototypes from them last week of new stuff that we're working on. So it's definitely very cool. And the head guy, the owner, is an engineer himself. So it's super easy to talk to him. He relates on a lot of stuff and he gets stuff done. So been very easy to work with. And it's definitely going to be interesting in the future as well.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, man. Just to be able to have someone in your back corner to be able to work with, and like you said, 20 different prototypes, like that's insane. Just to be able to make your specific recommendations on each one, and then to know that the masses are going to be using that, and then refer to Ben Johns every time they
You
crush
got to
it.
make your tweaks. Basically, you got to isolate variables and figure out what works. And it's really amazing. Like maybe I take it for granted a little bit, but I've gotten to do that for myself personally. Like how many people get to be like, okay, I need this, and this in a paddle, and they just have it done. Right? It's pretty cool.
Okay, so what's the difference between a couple months ago when I'm down in Los Angeles and I'm playing pickleball with Andrew Harden, his like my cousins, just like playing back and forth in the random that they have compared to your Hyperion? Like, how much better will I play? How many less points am I going to score against you compared to if I'm using a crap original paddle?
Mostly it's the Indian, not the arrow. I'll start with that.
Okay.
You can't ask for too much, but the first thing I emphasize with anybody, especially non-pros, is you need a paddle that has solidity, which basically just means the response outside of the sweet spot can't be drastically different from the center, because we all know we don't hit the center every time, and everyone wants to have that big sweet spot. But what's more important is if you can respond the same between sweet spot and not sweet spot, it basically makes your entire paddle completely usable. Then it's just user error in terms of how much power or spin or anything like that you put on it, not just, oh, I didn't hit it in the center, right? So you want that first and foremost for consistency. And the Hyperion was designed firstly with that in mind, which is it's carbon fiber on the surface, which is a rigid material, which makes it a little more solid around the edge. Then we have the curvature, especially at the top, it's kind of rounded, which gives it the same effect. And then there's foam around the outside, which also increases that effect. So you're all trying to maximize that, minimizing the disparity between the sweet spot and outside of it. That's number one. And then carbon fiber naturally is going to have more spin than any other surface that we're using right now that's legal. And they try to maximize it. So right near the limit of legality, you want maximum spin because you can manipulate the ball more, which doesn't matter a lot for lower level players, but more so for a higher level player, especially tennis players. And then of course we want pop, right? We want power. Easy power is great. And that I would say is third in mind, but still a factor. And then honestly, my paddle is mostly designed for me. It's not for everybody, nor is any paddle for anybody. So for instance, if I'm going, hey, what do I recommend this generic, just starting player? It's not going to be what I'm using. It's more of a player's paddle than a starter paddle. So yeah, it very much depends on where you're at and what your game style is and all that.
Gotcha. And you need that spin for when you're sending that wicked backhand over when you don't have any room against your wall growing up, right?
Yep, that's right. I don't know how you knew that either. I forget where I said that. But yeah. In table tennis, my basement, there's a bookshelf on my left. So in table tennis, you're supposed to run around your backhand and hit a forehand. We call it a run around loop with the forehand. I couldn't do that, so I learned how to hit a backhand pretty well.
And that's what's led to you having so much success in your pickleball career. Ben, it's been an honor chatting with you so far. I feel like I could chop it up with you for a while, just talking sports, food, you name it. But the way we wrap up every episode is we ask our guests their biggest piece of advice for the next generation of athletes. I'm sure that you've got at least a tidbit of information that will be insightful for our audience to learn.
Yeah, I'd say as anyone trying to be elite at any sport they're doing, you have to have a goal that you want, right? Like everyone's pretty goal oriented, but you need to picture that and you need to be working for that every day. You're not going to be motivated 24/7. Nobody can do that. But having something in mind where you're like, that's what I want, that's what I'm working for, that's what I'm doing right now, this pain that I'm going through is for that. That's what you have to have in order to have the most motivation you can and work as hard as you can. And some people just don't have a strong enough one for whatever they're doing. If that's the case, that's okay. Maybe you're not meant to play something at an elite level, but if you want it enough, you'll find something that you can picture and want enough to work hard at. And that's where you start. And then everything else goes from there.
Set that goal. I love that. Ben Johns, thank you so much for sharing your time with the Athletes Podcast audience. It's been a pleasure, man. Really appreciate it.